All right, joining me on the line today is Max Keiser. Max hosts his own television program on the Russia Today network called The Keiser Report. He also hosts a weekly talk radio show, and he is a former Wall Street trader, has some very interesting views on what's happening in the global economy today. Max, thank you so much for joining me on Follow the Money Weekly.
Hey, Jerry, it's great to be on.
Max, you have a very interesting background. Why don't you start by telling our audience a little bit about you, a little bit about yourself and your background?
Well, I started as a stockbroker in 1982, working on Wall Street, and this was an interesting period on Wall Street. It was the end of a 16-year bear market, and brokers at that time were working night jobs, teachers and cab drivers, to make ends meet. You couldn't really make a living as a stockbroker on Wall Street in the 1982 period. I was 22 years old, and that was the beginning of course, the biggest bull market in history. And throughout the 1980s, we just rode the bull, and it was a fantastic experience. Then in 1990, I took a sabbatical. I moved to Paris. I ended up staying 5 years in Paris. I sold an idea for a screenplay to Miramax Films in 1994, which never got produced, but I ended up in Los Angeles. I founded, and was former CEO of a company called the Hollywood Stock Exchange. I patented and designed virtual currencies and virtual trading. And now, of course, that's big business because with Farmville and Zynga and all this virtual market making that's going on. I've also had an interest in market making and price discovery, which is really the nuts and bolts of Wall Street. How prices are derived, through the buys and the sells and the order flow and the specialist function on the floor of the exchange and then various exchanges. And I took that idea and I applied it to activism. So when I was living in France again in the early 2000s, I created Karma Bank to give activists a way to monetize their dissent. I did that for a few years, and then I started writing for The Ecologist magazine, which ended up turning into a gig for Al Jazeera TV. Made 10 documentaries for Al Jazeera, including one about the coming collapse of the Icelandic economy and the Icelandic krona. It's called Money Geyser. You can see it on YouTube. So I predicted the collapse of the krona pretty accurately. And this led to a show on the BBC World News called The Oracle with Max Keiser. Then we started up Keiser Report on RT, On the Edge for Press TV, and the weekly radio show for Resonance FM in London called Truth About Markets. So the common theme has always been about markets and price discovery and activism in the sense that I'm always interested in markets and making sure that all parties have their fair representation in markets. And so this is, I don't know if you want to talk about that or not, but my approach to, let's say, politics is one where I fully embrace the magic of markets and capitalism, but I also believe that all parties must have a representation at the table. And this is something that a lot of people don't understand, especially people who are activists. They don't even understand this, and that's been kind of an uphill battle to get folks who are trying to get their voices heard to understand that markets are not their enemy, that markets can be their friend, and so that kind of takes us up to the present, I guess. And then we've got this campaign right now called Crash JPMorgan Buy Silver. Once again, it's kind of mixing politics and finance, identifying the weak spot in the global economy, which is JPMorgan's short position on silver, and understanding that by taking physical silver off the market, you're pressuring that short position and pressuring that stock price and pressuring the company. And JPMorgan, of course, is involved in all kinds of nasty banking business. And so this is a way for folks to strike a blow against JPMorgan and the whole banking community by taking physical silver on their possession. Not only do they get to watch the price of their silver go up, as it's been going up since we started talking. We've been talking about gold and silver now for 8 years. I went personally 90% gold and silver 8 years ago in my own portfolio. And now we're just really focusing on silver because as it relates to this global insurrection against the banker occupation, as we call it.
Yeah, Max, I mean, it's unreal what we're seeing in gold and silver right now. We're looking at the markets this week. We've seen a massive spike in gold. We've seen a nice pop in silver. And it just seems like the steam is not going to run out. Now, let's talk about JPMorgan. You brought them up. You've called them, quote, the biggest financial terrorist on Wall Street. And I think many people are rightly angry at the investment banks. They're rightly angry and upset and frustrated with the Wall Street bankers. But some of them don't really know why they're mad. They simply look at the greed, they see the corruption, they obviously know there's something wrong. But you're actually pointing to something here known as the price manipulation of silver markets, which the average folks really don't walk around thinking about like somebody like you and I do who are in the business. Why don't you just briefly explain to the average person how JPMorgan is manipulating or suppressing the price of silver?
Yeah, specifically, that's something that they're involved with right now that is atrocious. And I've vacillated between calling JPMorgan and Goldman Sachs the biggest financial terrorist in the world, but let's stick with JPMorgan for a second. And first of all, let's just look at this word terrorist for a second, and is it an applicable word to use? And the reason I do use the word terrorist is because if you compare, let's say, JPMorgan with an Islamic extremist, you find some remarkable similarities. First of all, they believe they're doing God's work, whether it's Jamie Dimon or Lloyd Blankfein at Goldman Sachs, who recently was quoted, he's doing God's work. He's not doing the work of the people or under the constructs of law. He answers his own law, the law of a God that he believes in. So he's a religious fanatic in that sense. Is he willing to kill himself and others in the name of his fanaticism? Well, yeah, we see this all the time. These banks are committing acts of banking manipulation and fraud that ends up killing people. We know on 9/11, for example, that some brokers were buying puts on airline stocks, knowing full well that it would cause huge damage. And I have some evidence to believe that some brokers in the 9/11 Twin Towers were actually buying airline puts. They themselves died in the event, so they became suicide bankers, again, like a jihadi. Another comparison is you've got extremist jihadi bankers on Wall Street follow their Quran or their Bible. Their book is Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations, and they selectively quote from it, and they read into it, and they extract lines from it, and it's the basis of their fundamentalist, their radical market fundamentalism. And the comparisons go on, and you understand that what we're talking about are extremist, radical, market fundamentalists that are willing to kill themselves and others for their radical beliefs. And this is why Jamie Dimon and Lloyd Blankfein and the whole crew on Wall Street are equal to any radical jihadi terrorist in the world. And the damage that they do, however, is much worse because their influence is much greater. But talking about the silver situation with JPMorgan, they have, like other banks, the way that they have traditionally made a few extra bucks on the side is by getting involved in the precious metal leasing market. You know, precious metals don't pay any interest. So what they've been doing is through these leasing banks, the government allows them to lease gold, and then they'll sell it short and buy it back, and they play games in that market, and they pick up 1 or 2% a year on an asset that would ordinarily not pay any interest. But over the years, that short position, the greed has built up. So in the case of Morgan, they've got, by some estimates, more than 1 billion ounces of silver short. It's hard to get the exact numbers because, of course, we're talking about an industry that's very opaque. We're talking about customized over-the-counter derivatives tied to the silver futures markets, et cetera. But based on the research I've done, they are short a considerable number of ounces. And in so doing, they are not allowing the market to function in a free capitalist, free market way. The price discovery is not happening. For every order that comes in to buy silver, JPMorgan and others will flood the market with 10 orders, and these orders are with borrowed money, and in many cases they are naked shorts. This would mean that they're selling contracts that do not exist. They're counterfeiting contracts 10, 20 times what the buy orders are as a way to keep the price down, keep the price low. And as long as this is a market that's cleared through the COMEX, through the paper market, and as long as nobody takes physical delivery of their silver at the end of the month, they can continue this game indefinitely. But starting last year, guys like Eric Sprott in Canada said, I sense a huge opportunity here. If I start taking physical delivery off the market, and he's, of course, Sprott has got his physical silver trust, he's a big player in gold, and he's starting to force the issue and force a mark-to-market accounting at the end of the month, and he's basically causing this massive short squeeze. And this is what I've been talking about as well, but on the retail level, anybody out there in the world who wants to get in on a good kicking of a major terrorist, JPMorgan, take that physical silver off the market and watch this puppy squirm. I'm think since they've collateralized their own stock against these positions, I think once the price of silver gets above the price of JPMorgan stock, which is roughly in the mid-40s, you're going to start to see some fireworks, and you're going to start to see the short interest build on JPMorgan stock itself by hedge funds who are going to start to come in and smell the blood in the water and attack JPMorgan stock.
JPMorgan is basically artificially creating more sellers in the market through their leverage than the average buyer out there. So as more buyers begin to buy, obviously it begins to compete with those artificial selling numbers, and we're actually going to begin to see a crack. And I think you're exactly right. I mean, silver and gold have been something we've been in as well for some time. We adhere to something Max called a PACE philosophy. It's precious metals, agricultural commodities, and energy. We've been doing that for years, and that's been, obviously a great place to be going forward. I want to get your take on the Fed and QE3 in particular. I want to give you what I think may lie ahead, and I want to get your thoughts on it, plus what you think. In my mind, where the Fed is today, they operate at this level where the present must be the minimum. I mean, that must be their motto. The present is the minimum. Under no circumstances can the market be allowed to tank. It must always be artificially propped up. Consumption must always continue. It's just the old line that, in this debt-based monetary system, we have to have overconsumption at all times. So they're trying to boost asset prices, and they've done it successfully. The wealth effect's been created. They've been able to drive up asset prices, making people go out and consume more. It hasn't kickstarted employment yet, so employment's not really catching up. My thought is, Max, is that as we head into this June 30th deadline for the end of QE2, in my mind, I believe the Fed is squirming, wanting to see the markets tank. Because if the markets don't tank, they're not really going to have a permission slip to start a QE3. So it's very possible that maybe a game of chicken. We may make it to June 30th. Nothing happens. There's no announcement of QE3. Then the market tanks, and then the Fed gets its permission slip. But either way, I see a QE3 ahead, regardless of either situation. What are your thoughts? Where do you think things are heading for the Fed?
Well, you mentioned the Fed was targeting asset prices, and in particular real estate. And on that score, they failed because real estate prices are still sinking, and they're sinking to a pretty significant level. In the U.S., there are still major markets that are experiencing huge markdowns in real estate prices. So the target that they were aiming for, I just saw today that the markdown, the drawdown on the real estate from 2005 top to now is something like almost $7 trillion. This is now bigger than the dot-com wipeout, which was $5 trillion. So they totally missed their target. Now, as far as needing permission to roll on to a QE3 or not, I think I listened to a guy named Jim Rickards who has been on the street for a long, long time, and he makes an excellent point in terms of the actual size of the Fed balance sheet now being in the multi-trillions. And just the rollover of that paper alone and the monetization of the interest, which is now 100 or 200 million per month or something on that order, means that the Fed is in a place of perpetual QE. Whether they call it QE3 or not, or however they massage the nuancing of the messaging of what they're doing, the fact is that they are so huge now that they're going to be monetizing just the interest on the debt in perpetuity. They're locked in perpetual QE. They're locked. This is why we're talking about hyperinflation. because this is a huge catastrophe for the U.S. dollar. You know, when Bernanke says just the other day he's going to keep an eye out for what he perceives to be some inflation in the pipeline, the guy is completely out of his mind if he doesn't see that we're talking about the real possibility of a currency collapse. And again, this is what gold and silver are telling us. They're telling us that the confidence in the currency is diminishing. And James Turk over at goldmoney.com, you know, he's been very good at pointing out things like backwardation in silver and what that's done to the price of silver. He makes the point that if gold were to get now into backwardation, it would mean that total collapse of confidence in the dollar and a panic buying into gold. And this is what I think we're talking about. And I just don't think the machinations of the Fed are going to matter much going forward because we're talking about a currency collapse. We're talking about an extremely, a huge dislocation in these markets that's going to be historical in a lot of ways. Something we haven't seen in quite some time. Certainly, you know, in the U.S., you had in the 1930s, you had a deflationary depression. It wasn't a hyperinflation or an inflationary depression. It was a deflationary depression. You had the stagflation of the 70s, which was traumatic, but again, it was a stagflation going on. This is going to be like Argentinian type of Weimar Republic, a currency collapse, and this is really interesting, setting up things for what I believe is coming. My out-of-the-box thinking, if you will, on this is that there's going to have to be a reconfiguration of the global currency grid completely, and that you're going to have the dollar is going to have to be exchanged for some kind of new global currency, whether it's an extension of these special drawing rights that is already being used in the IMF and the World Bank. The details are not clear, but just at the Davos that just ended this past spring, before Davos, they said the folks there said they wanted to create a $100 trillion credit line as a way to bail out the entire global system. And this is what I think that they're thinking about. I think they see the yen, the yuan, the dollar, the euro kind of all being exchanged for this new global currency. And the dollar exchange is going to be horrible. It's going to be probably the worst of any of the major G8 countries. So you're going to have a sudden 50, 60% markdown in dollar in purchasing power and a loss of sovereignty because now the Fed will be taking their orders directly, and they already do indirectly, but directly from the Bank of International Settlements or some other global banking institution. And here's the shocker. People in the U.S. are going to be paying not only their IRS income, their national tax at the end of the year and their state and local, their federal, state, and local, they're going to be paying their world tax. That's going to be world, federal, state, and local. Because, of course, that new global central bank will have to be funded from taxation, which is, just like when the Federal Reserve was created in 1913, they created the income tax to fund it. So this is what I see coming. And all of the wars that are going on, I think, provide cover for something like this. They're wars of opportunity, they're wars of convenience, they're wars of aggression. There's nothing strategic or defensive about these wars, but I think it's a great way to get people, frightened and fearful, and to claim that, to keep you safe, we got to bring in this new global bank, global currency, and that's kind of what I see coming.
Interesting. Well, and I certainly agree with you on a world level, seeing a global central bank, some sort of global currency, whether it is the SDRs, whatever it might be. Max, I've always thought that we might see a move towards regional currencies first, similar to the euro. Many people have been dogging the euro since its inception back in 99, and then, of course, it hit the streets 2002. I've always been of the opinion that the euro is a prototype for some sort of setup, as you're referring to. So I've never really seen it as, I've always seen it as inflexible. It doesn't seem like it's something that can just break down. What are your thoughts on the euro? Do you see a disintegration of the euro prior to this world central bank and this world currency that you're talking about? or do you think the euro hangs on until then?
Well, the euro, when you're talking about the euro, I think what a lot of people don't understand is that you're talking about Germany. You're talking about the German central bank, the Bundesbank. Germany, to the extent that the peripheral economies in Europe are flailing, whether it's Ireland or Greece, and bring selling pressure to the euro, Germany benefits as a huge exporter, the second biggest exporter in the world. And to the extent that the benefit of keeping that currency together, again, benefits Germany. Germany is playing both sides of the street here. They don't mind if it gets weak because it helps their exports, and they don't mind if it gets strong because that helps their purchasing power as Germans. That the economy in Germany is booming. The unemployment rate is the lowest it's been in a long, long time, certainly since reunification with Eastern Germany. And remember, after World War II, Germany was split. And then under the euro, they were allowed to coexist together under the same flag, basically, as long as it was diluted amongst the entire euro region. But if there's going to be a split, Germany would lick its chops and say, okay, now we're reunited. We've got our bank. We've got our own currency again, and they could be a world superpower again. So they hold all the cards. And this is the bulwark that's behind the euro. People have been saying the euro is going to disintegrate, the euro is in trouble, but it's very strong, and it looks very strong at the moment. So, in terms of how this would play out into this global currency situation, as long as the Bundesbank has a major role, and they can negotiate good terms for the Germany and their friends. They'll be active players. They've got a really strong economy. The U.S. has a really weak economy. They have no leverage. They come to the poker game holding a pair of jokers, Bernanke and Obama. They've got nothing to show. So they're in a good position in the euro because we're talking about Germany.
So you live in Europe. Just in our final moments here, I just want to get your take. What's it like as an American right now in the middle of all of these multiple theaters of war we have going on in the Middle East, and of course what's happening in the euro crisis, what's happening in the United States of America? What's it like living over there as an American? What's the word on the street? What's the vibe?
Well, I think it's pity. I mean, most Europeans, they take pity on America. It's not even worth bashing America anymore. I lived here 14 years ago, and people like to bash America, but now they don't even bother because there's nothing left to bash. They realize it's a diminished country, that it's on the way out, that it's lost its ability to compete, and that the dollar is going to collapse. And so they just kind of shrug their shoulders, and they're like, yeah, everyone, eventually you lose your empire. Everyone in Europe has gone through it, and now America has to go through it. America, I don't think they understand yet that they have to experience this, what's known in Europe has been already experienced. When you lose your empire, the French lost their empire, the British lost their empire, the Spanish lost their empire. They know what it's about. But Americans, they don't. They have to learn this firsthand. What happens when you lose your empire? When the world and the dollar is no longer the world reserve currency, when you're no longer insulated from what's happening around the world, when events that happen around the world actually impact your day-to-day existence, that's something that Americans have not experienced. They've been living in a bubble, and now the bubble's popping, and people around the world just kind of wish them luck. Good luck with it. Hope you survive. The American might not survive. It's a very young country. It's an experimental country. It got taken over by special interests. It's run by radical, fundamentalist, jihadi bankers, suicide bankers, and it might not make it. It's less than 5% of the world's population. They contribute 27% of the world's pollution. They don't have a lot of friends. It's just maybe they survive, maybe they don't. But I don't think anyone would miss it one way or the other.
All right. Well, before we close, quick thought about the 2012 presidential election. It's been compared to arguing over a bar tab on the Titanic. Who's going to be president? In your mind, what does 2012 hold? Do you think we're going to see a far steering to the right and a backlash against the Democrats, or do you think we're going to continue to see Barack Obama into 2012?
I just hope Ron Paul gets nominated, and makes a run for it. There are very few politicians in the U.S. that are worth anything. You know, Ron Paul, Ralph Nader is an excellent politician. He's actually Ralph Nader and Ron Paul have appeared together on many times. They agree on 80-90% of their policies. They're very much in agreement on many things. You know, Ralph Nader hasn't had much success, you know, in Washington. Ron Paul at least has some success in Washington. So if that materializes and there's some momentum behind it, I would support that wholeheartedly. I did not vote for Obama. I have not voted in the U.S. in 20 years. But if Ron Paul were running, I would vote.
Yeah, he was able to raise $3 million in the first quarter, shocking many of the commentators. It would be really something. I saw that Jesse Ventura, said that he would be interested in being the vice president on that ticket. I'm sure many people would.
It might make sense. You know, Jesse Ventura could be a great vice president. He has been a successful governor of a state, and he understands the issues. I mean, he couldn't be worse than Joe Biden. I mean, Joe Biden, you know, or Spiro Agnew, you know, going back to Nixon's day, or Dan Quayle. Usually, the vice president doesn't really add much. It doesn't really do much. But I think, you know, Jesse Ventura as a communicator, as a media presence, as somebody who can go on major media outlets and really go toe to toe with the propaganda outlets like Fox News that are nothing more than state propaganda. Worst state propaganda in the world is Fox News. You know, I worked for TV outlets for Qatar, Iran, Russia, and they're all state-owned, but none of them are as insidious as Fox News. I mean, this is the worst state-run media outlet, you know, going all the way back. You'd have to go back to fascist Germany to find something this ridiculous.
Let's get to your show, because we're closing now. You have a show on Russia Today. It's called The Keiser Report. I've been watching that for some time. You have some great guests on, great commentary on. Tell us about the show. How can people watch it?
Yeah, it's distributed via satellite, so it goes out to 200 million people. It competes with CNN and Fox and BBC in terms of satellite television. It's on cable TV. It is picked up on various cable outlets in the U.S. I know a lot of people on Wall Street watch it because, to be quite frank, the female presenters on RT are extremely attractive, and you hear that all the time from traders. You know, there's a very, you know, kind of a macho world on Wall Street, and I always hear that people watch the RT because the presenters are gorgeous. But you know, you can get it cable outlets all over the U.S. And the schedule is different. Of course, I just watch it on YouTube. They're very good about putting stuff on YouTube, and we get a lot of traffic on YouTube. And so we just signed up to do another season with them. So it's going very well. And they give us complete editorial, you know, carte blanche, which is another thing. I have never had any editorial kind of censoring from any of these networks except for the BBC.
That makes sense.
So, you know, I've done except for the BBC. So, and of course, I'm not on any American outlet. You know, I'm not on any American distribution because when I was on France 24 2 years ago or 3 years ago, when I talking about Goldman Sachs or scum, and saying and talking in those terms, and then, you know, this is just, again, it's because the market's fundamentalism of America that drives that economy. It's a cult-like religious fervor. So if you say Goldman Sachs or scum, it's like, you know, it's blasphemy, because there is no critical thinking. It's all, you know, to put it into investing terms, it's momentum. There's a momentum to it. There's momentum dementia. It's like Jim Jones and Guyana. It's like a suicide cult. But my feeling is that therein lies the opportunity for gold and silver, because gold and silver puts all of that fiat money, CNBC claptrap nonsense to rest. It's all going to go away. The price discovery will kick in on gold and silver. Gold is trading, my minimum target's 5,000, and then I see it heading into a new phase, a third phase of its bull market, could take it up much higher. And as long as there are idiots on Fox News willing to repeat state propaganda, Pentagon spoon-fed militaristic nonsense, there's going to be doubt in the gold market, and I'm a buyer.
Where do you see silver heading? You say gold 5,000. What do you think about silver?
Well, I think the silver-gold ratio will get to that 20-to-1 ratio. 20-to-1 ratio. So gold, the gold goes to 10,000, silver goes to 500. Mm-hmm. Plus, interestingly enough, all the supply issues about silver in terms of the photography market going offline, which brought on more supply, those issues are now being no longer talked about because they're being picked up much more supply in terms of investor demand from all over the world. And now there's a genuine, the production cannot keep up with demand. This is a new dynamic in silver where the demand is greater than the production. There's, 700 million ounces a year in production or so? Mm. The demand is greater. And these silver vigilantes, like the Eric Sprotts of the world, who are buying tons and tons and tons of this stuff, physical silver for delivery, they're just scooping up. There's only 1 billion ounces of silver above ground. Half of that are in these exchange-traded funds. That's 500 million ounces. So you're talking about, how many, $20 billion of actual physical silver available for purchase? That's less than one of the founder of Facebook is supposed to be worth on paper based on the transactions that Goldman Sachs did on behalf of Facebook. It's a teeny market. And yet it's used in all the electronics around the world, all the iPads, all the iPhones. They all need silver. There's huge investor demand. It's going into all the solar technologies, medical technologies. We've hit peak silver. We've hit peak silver. I truly believe that to be the case.
Yeah, Max. I mean, I've heard from very top analysts, guys who have been in the business for a long time, saying we are possibly 7 to 8 years away from no silver at all. It's really something to see the investment demand, the industrial demand, and of course, when we say investment demand, the monetary demand. I mean, how silver and gold have been used as money for so long, and now we're starting to finally realize and wake up. This paper money experiment was just that, a very bad dream, a bad experiment, as people rush back to precious metals. Max, if folks would like to hop onto the web and find you, do you have a website you'd like to talk about?
Well, yeah, just go to maxkeiser.com. That's Keiser, and that's my main website, and it's got all the latest stuff up there. As a matter of fact, I just posted something from your website just about an hour ago.
You did? Okay. Well, they can go there and go to maxkeiser.com, and you'll find that there. Max, it's been great having you on. I'd love to have you back on soon. We didn't have very much time to cover everything, but great insights. I'd love to have you back on and maybe talk about a particular topic.
My pleasure, Jerry.